So I love how everything always works. It just always does. And when I decided to do this 3-week series on this book by Reverend Joan Gattuso, The Lotus Still Blooms, I knew that next week we're going to be starting our small group, but I never factored in the fact that it's Mother's Day. And I usually do a talk around Mother's Day. I think it was last year that I dressed up as Myrtle Fillmore, and that was pretty fun. And but I love, because what we're going to be talking about today, I could really hear our mothers telling us some of these things. So it goes right along with Mother's Day. Now, we talked about the 4 noble truths. The first noble truth is that life is suffering. The second noble truth is that the cause of suffering is our own grasping and clinging, our attachments to our desires. The third noble truth is cessation of suffering is possible. And the fourth noble truth is presentation of the Eightfold Path leads to the end of suffering and promotes well-being. For those of you who haven't been here maybe for a couple Sundays, this book really brings together the Eastern and the Western. And know that with anything that I share, I'm not telling you this is the ultimate truth. I'm saying that, I'm sharing what the best that I can, what some of the Buddhist teachings are, but I think that we always have an opportunity to learn and to grow. And I know that when I hear a truth and then I hear it presented in another way, that truth begins to become more real inside of me. And then I hear it from a different perspective until it is a realization, until I become the living embodiment of that. The Eightfold Path: right view, right thought, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration. We are talking about the last 3 today. Again, if you haven't been here, you can go to unityofspringfield.org and listen to it or watch it, or you can get a CD or DVD in the bookstore. So here's some of the things that I could hear like mothers saying about what we're going to be talking about today. And a mother would say, do what is right. Do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. A mother would say, be mindful of what you are doing. Focus. Many mothers ever say that, or, say that to you? Pay attention. Exactly. And then the last thing that we're going to talk about is love. And I, think that this feminine energy just epitomizes this divine feminine love. So we're first going to talk about right effort. And right effort, simply stated, is not dissipating your energies on the meaningless. And my first thought that came to my mind was how much I see, and not just young kids, but I see it all the time where we are married to our electronics. And it's really hard. I noticed that when we got to MSU, those kids are walking and they walk in front of us and their heads are down like this and they're on their phones, and nobody's connecting. And it's interesting because Mary would always just say, hey, you having a good day today? And boy, you pop that, and all of a sudden they look up and they engage. But I could hear moms, saying, turn that thing off. And I thought about, even as we're maturing, I like to use that word rather than aging, as we're maturing, Paul and I crack up about how many times we're like, oh my gosh, the music of today, it's so interesting. And then we're like, we've become our parents, turn that awful music off. I'm always saying to my daughter, are you listening to the lyrics that these kids are listening to? Because the beat's all good. And, right effort is thought of as right discipline or right diligence. And, this really has to do with our spiritual practice and having a spiritual practice of some sort, whatever that looks like, that we are leaning into on a daily basis. So right discipline, right diligence, it's, get in there and clean up your bedroom, pick those things up off the floor, how many of us, again, not only have had it said to us, but, we've been saying it to our children. So she looked at, she has actually 4 actions or practices that are associated with right effort. The first one is preventing unwholesome seeds to arise in us. Now, what she says is that when we come into this world, think of your consciousness as this clean slate, but we come in already with all of these wonderful, wholesome seeds planted in our consciousness. But unwholesome seeds are things that we have been programmed with. Unwholesome seeds are ideas that our parents had, that our culture has, experiences that we've had, and we've planted these seeds without even recognizing that we've actually planted these seeds. And so she said we have to become aware of what seeds we are watering. Are these the seeds that I actually want to have grow in my experience? And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking about seeds like prejudice. I grew up and my mom had no prejudices, but my dad had prejudices. And you don't even realize that you're capturing these things when you're growing up. And then if you don't become consciously aware of them, you're making these judgments all the time based on these unwholesome seeds that were planted. Seeds like, we have some religious training, lack, not enoughness of any kind, and just the overall nature of people. Again, I grew up with a thought that, people were bad and life was scary. And boy, those were my seeds that I nurtured and nourished because I didn't know any better. So then she says, number 2 is helping unwholesome seeds that have arisen to return to store consciousness. And she says we do this by withdrawing our attention on them. Now, we have to first become awake and aware enough to know that we even have them. But that's part of what this eightfold path is about, is becoming aware. And then recognizing this is not what I want to nurture in my life. This is not what I feel and believe. This is not what is true for me. And she said, simply give them over to the Holy Spirit. Take this away, transform this. And it's not that we're doing something with a being outside of us, but it's really just kind of giving it and knowing that it can be transformed. The third thing is finding ways to water wholesome seeds in our store consciousness. Now, wholesome seeds are joy, love, peace, kindness, compassion, happiness, generosity, anything that we would have as qualities of God, qualities of the divine. And as we know in unity, and it's here too in the Buddhist teachings, what we focus on expands. And so, focus on these good things that are already within us. These are the reality, the truth of our being. And then the fourth one is water wholesome seeds that have already arisen, so that they may continue to develop further. And these are things that we already, even coming into a teaching like this and recognizing that we're all beloved children of the divine, that we're all at our core, everybody is good. And so sometimes in difficult times when we're having a hard time seeing that we're taking the time to water these seeds by praying and by meditating, by contemplating, by sometimes wrestling with that angel that is telling you there's good, and you're wrestling with it, but you're willing to be changed at the core of your being because you really desire to remember, even when you can't see that in another or in a situation, that it is there. The Buddha said that all effort must be made by you, that no one else can have breakthroughs for you, and you cannot hire somebody to do it, that you must expend your time and your energy, your resources, in order to have these wonderful awakenings. And it's so worth it. Whatever it is go through, and really sometimes it's tough because we go through some tough times and we do wrestle with what's going on in our life, and but when we stay true to some of these practices, we find, number one, of course, is that we have some tools that we can use to get through those times. Number two is that we ultimately become blessed by the experiences, because we really do become more because of them, if we're willing to become more because of them. Okay, right mindfulness. She says the simplest definition of mindfulness for her is awakened attention. Awakened attention. And we've all heard of mindfulness. We did mindfulness meditation a number of weeks ago, and we actually practiced the mindfulness meditation. If you didn't get to do that, you can find that in some of the archives of our talks. So mindfulness refers to a couple of different things. She says to be attentive to mindfulness is to be attentive to the Holy Spirit, the whole Spirit of God that is right here within us, to our Buddha nature, to our Christ nature, to become a lot more present and aware of this. It's what I love about the affirmation for today. It's I'm mindful of that presence of God wherever I am. I'm mindful of it. I'm in the present moment of it. I bring it with me. Right mindfulness, she says, is noticing what's going on right in front of you. You know, you look at somebody and you can, if you're being mindful, you can pick up on their energy. You can see by their facial expressions. You can see by their body language that they're feeling something. And a mindful person will then go to that place of compassion and engage in some dialogue about that, and be able to help somebody move from a place where they're feeling very distressed. And, you know, it's easy for us to just kind of walk away from those situations. And I'm one of those people. I'm going to tell you right now that when something is going on in me, I retract. I go in and I'm trying to figure it out, and so I don't talk about it immediately, because I got to figure it out inside myself. But it really does help me when somebody notices that and helps me talk through it, because a lot of times I won't reach out for that help. So being mindful is recognizing those times in people about you. And you know, being so mindful also is just being present. Being present to our intuitive nudgings. How many of us know that we have intuitive nudgings? Right. How many of us have not listened to a lot of those intuitive nudgings? And how's that working for you? You know, I shared before that a couple months ago when I cut 4 of my fingers, that when I was using this knife, the nudge said, do not use that knife. And I was not being mindful, and I was not being present, because as I knew not to use this knife, I was also talking to my sister. And so whoosh, you know, boom, just like that. And I got to tell you that just this little experience here with my fingers, it's changed my perspective on so much about being mindful and being present and being aware. But not just that, my intuitive hits. My intuitive hits. We went to Arts Fest last week downtown, and I ran across some good friends of mine, and they had their little grandson with them. And my immediate intuitive hit was to ask them if they had put sunscreen on. But my ego mind said, "Oh my God, I can't ask that." And bam, this hit came again to ask. And my ego once again said, the grandmother, of course she did that. I don't want to embarrass her by, so I didn't say anything. But even as my daughter and I were walking away, I said, Krista, something really strong was there. We ran into him a little bit later, and she said, we forgot to bring sunscreen. And they didn't have sunscreen to put on them, but they found a mom who was putting sunscreen on. My point being, I wasn't mindful of that. And it wasn't just like, hey, maybe it was like, say something. But, and being mindful, you guys, it really is getting out of our ego. And the thing about this person is she would be the last person to ever be offended by that. But it wasn't even about that. It was about me not listening, not being mindful of something that was so strong. So being mindful is also about really... And here's the thing I love about intuitive hits is that the more that you start to pay attention to and follow your intuitive hits, the more you start to have more and more and more. And it's like, it's the coolest thing, isn't it? Because I can see many of you shaking your heads like, yeah. And it's amazing. So that's mindfulness. Okay, right concentration. Now, right concentration, this one took me a little bit longer. I couldn't get it totally by just reading the book because it felt to me like it went so much with mindfulness. So I got online and I read some things about it, and it says that concentration and mindfulness are distinctly different functions, that they each have their role to play in meditation, but also just in life itself. Concentration is often called the one-pointedness of the mind, and concentration generally has to be forced. And it was funny because when I read it, the next sentence was, yes, the word force was used there, and that mindfulness will give us something to focus our attention on, and then we use concentration to keep that focus. And then mindfulness will gently remind us that we're not focused. So I don't know how many of you have maybe done a meditation where you're focused on your breathing, or you're focused on a mantra, or have you ever done the meditation where you're focused on a candle flame? And has anybody ever had the experience where you don't stay focused? Normal. But it's utilizing concentration. It's forcing yourself to come back and to stay present to whatever is there. And I love, because then mindfulness once again will say, oops, let's get your attention back here. Concentration is bringing that back. And I think about how many times I'll say to my grandkids, or focus, just focus, just focus on what you're doing right here. So concentration is really about that focus, along with mindfulness, because I love always the idea that when you're doing your dishes, are you being mindful and in the awareness and focusing on what you're doing? And I can tell you the majority of the time I'm not. I'm doing my dishes and I'm thinking about either something else in the day or the next thing that I'm doing. But when I try to stay present to that, it's very different. Or being there when you're eating every bite of your food and really feeling the textures and tasting the tastes of the food and being very mindful and focused on that. I honestly don't think I've ever gotten through a meal where I've been able to maintain that, but it's not about that. It's about these are great ideas to have a great experience of life. And I do want to say this here. This is the Buddhist way. And I find I have been blessed by this, and things have come up for me that really helped me get some clarity on some things through these teachings. But again, I'm not here to say this is the way. In fact, I will say that in reading the first part of this book, I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed, because I thought, my gosh, I could never live this totally. And just that realization, it just felt so disciplined, and it felt so strict and so rigid. And I got to tell you, I'm not a very disciplined person. I just like to just have fun, And so that's where my mind was until I read the next chapter. And the next chapter was on the middle way. And the middle way, this is the point at which one reaches what she calls cosmic balance between austerity or simplicity and creature comforts of the world. Because I was kind of starting to feel a little bad that I like my comforts. I have a ton of blankets and pillows, and but really so much of the middle way has to do with the balance. And even I think it was said that the Buddha, that some of the people who were staying like in the cellars and stuff were kind of complaining about the fact that he was living a more lavish life. And he said to them, I did that. And I did that more than you could ever imagine that I did that. And I didn't really like it. And that was a better way for him to live, to have the creature comforts, of life. So it's really about finding balance in our lives. And I don't know about you guys, but I know in my life, no, I probably do know about you, I shouldn't say that. We're busy people, aren't we? And, we're working, we've got families, we've got friends, we've got sports, we've got all these things going on. And it's very easy to get out of balance in our lives. And you're out of balance when you're starting to feel a lot of stress. And so this idea of the middle way is really saying, okay, what is it that I can bring into my experience that gives me pleasure? And start bringing some, more of that, so you have that more balanced life. And so the last thing that I want to share with you is the 4 immeasurables, and they're called that because they're so enormous they can't be measured, and they are love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And love is what I want to share with you today. I love what she says. Love is at the very core of our being. When all else is stripped away, true love remains. And I thought about that, especially because I went over to the hospital after Simone's mom passed, and her mom was just laying there. And reading this line was just like, that's what's true. When all else is stripped away, love is what remains. And love of how she shared her love that everybody had for her, but also her essence is love. And so that is what remains. It's our essential core. We do not have to seek to become loving, but rather we must remove all the obstacles and obscurations to love's presence within us. This means systematically, you ready? Eliminating all judgments and separating thoughts. So by tomorrow, you should have this mastered. No problem. She studied, and her friends that she thought expressed this love, and she had 4 characteristics. The first one, I didn't put it up here, is in order to be an extraordinarily loving person, we must love ourselves. Because if we're self-loathing, if we're self-degrading, we cannot truly love another in that pure way. The second thing she says is that loving people are verbal. That, and I've heard people say, he knows how I feel about her, she knows how I feel about her. And she said, no, you tell the people around you that you love them, and you tell them why you love them. You tell people around you why you appreciate them. You verbalize that, and you watch how people expand because of that. Number 3, a loving person is generous. She said, tightwads need not apply. That when you are a loving person, you are generous, and not just financially, but you're generous with your time, you're generous with your talent, you're generous with your words and with your energy, that you're generous. And the last thing is, a truly loving person has learned to care for and cherish others as much as themselves. And so before I came here today, I just want you to know that all your mothers contacted me either from the other realm or whatever, and they had some things that they wanted me to share with you. They said, always do the right thing because it's the right thing to do. They said, pay attention. Pay attention and look at what's around here. Be mindful of the beauty of this world. They said, see the goodness in people and praise that and appreciate that. They said, be generous. They said, remember that you are enough. No matter what you've ever thought, that you are enough. And that there's such incredible pride in a non-egoic sense of who you are and who you are here to be. And that there is incredible love that is surrounding you and that is enveloping you at this moment, no matter what your experience ever was, that there's incredible love there for you. And remember that life is good and that God is good all the time, right? Let's say that. Life is good. Life is good. God is good. God is good. All the time. All the time. And the last thing that they said was make sure to put on clean underwear because you never know when you're going to be in an accident. So namaste.